Okay, I have been working on teaching some slightly more complex or advanced, and when I say advanced here, I mean just later in the curriculum, not particularly more challenging, depending on what your skill basis is. So, what I want to do is share this with kind of the broader group of people who haven't been able to attend class on a regular basis. And so, here's what I want to do. I want to talk a bit about hand changes and why we use different kinds of hand changes with the bow in particular. So as you are aware, the way we start in Matayoshi Kobudo is practicing the hand change methodology. So the hand change, if you recall, as part of our warm-ups, it's really important that we practice this. Always going through a double down position, and always use the concept of the octopus, the taco, to keep your fingers in contact. What we don't want to see, but you will see some Matayoshi Kobudo players do, is things like this. Where they let go, or where they change through a double upward palm. And so while I wasn't explicitly explained this by any of my teachers, I do believe the main reason we try to avoid going through a double up is the same reason why we practice thumb side strikes primarily, and that's because of the anatomical creation of the wrist. So the way that the biomechanics of the wrist work is you have a fair degree of flexion in this direction and very little flexion in this direction. And so what happens is your extension on the pinky side of the stick play is limited in range. And the further the range I go for, the more my grip is weakened through that process. So there's also a problem on the rear end. If I go double up, that grip release happens back here. So we have some difficult time holding the bow through a double palms up position. So this all plays with the other information I want to talk about today, and that is, our base method is the hand change method, and it has its own tactical benefits as well as weapon performance handling benefits, right? So you get the practice of changing hands, staying in contact, trying to not lose your weapon, even though you might be maneuvering. You want to make sure you're working through that process and not dropping your weapon. One of the benefits of this is when you're hitting and you want to hit with the other side, you wouldn't want to completely disengage and hit with the other side. There's some benefit to, if I hit once and I want to chase that person, remain in contact, press through, kind of dropping our center of gravity and pushing through, and then striking with the other side. Even through a hand change, we could still potentially hit, even if our secondary hand doesn't completely re-grasp the weapon. The biomechanics allow for you to make your second hit without even actually completing your second hand change. So long as your first hand change works, even if it just partially works, I don't get my thumb around it, and I get almost none of the second hand involved, the power of the strike can be nearly identical to what you could have if you had a proper grip. So there's some benefit, or there's some tactical thoughts there around why you may want to do this hand change and then attack, because you might be trying to apply pressure as you're advancing and only at the last minute then switch sides of the bow. That's one thought about that. So that's the base way that we use the bow in the kumiwaza sets, the 1 through 15. There's a lot of hand changes. Now, I'll give you an example. The second bow kata, which only Gerard has really started so far, the rest of you will get to right after your Shodan test. In that form, for example, so Shushi-no-kun has all the standard basic methodology of all the hand changes. Now, Chon-no-kun, depending on what you look at, now I've been taught this both ways, but primarily the way that includes the hand change, the way Shushi is, but I've watched old videos of Matayoshi and other people in demos at Matayoshi Kobudo, and there are times where they don't make a hand change in certain sections of the kata, and it seems to be because they're chasing very quickly and they're throwing an additional strike. So for instance, in Shonokun, towards the beginning in the first road of the kata, you perform a kakiyuke, hanayuke, naname, side, and vertical. So basically a 2, a 3, and a 1, and then a 5. Okay? But if you do that the basic way, like we do in Shushi, it takes a while because you're changing hands here and you're changing hands here. And so that takes longer. But obviously, if you were to skip the hand change, like some of the old players do, you would be very quickly through those techniques. So what I want you to consider is, on your own, when you are practicing, practice 2 methods, and then I'll show you another one here in a few minutes. So the first method is the way I've had you train all along with the hand change. The second is, I want you to train the opposite side, the short side of the stick. You may not be able to reach as far. So the number 1 is fairly difficult to come all the way overhead and strike, but practice it. Your number 2, same thing. Practice your number 2 with the short side of the stick. Your number 3, we actually do a fair amount. So doing the number 3 isn't that unusual. When you do the number 4, practice the number 4. So I'm all in a right side forward grip. So you would practice forward and back, your basics, numbers 1 through 4. And then you would switch sides, you'd switch leads and grips, and then you would practice it again. So you get practice on the short side of the stick without the hand change on every step, right? So I want you to add that to your practice. Next, I want to talk about kind of the third method, which is the sliding method, which in my opinion has its historical basis in spear play. So, evolutionarily, the chances are we picked up sticks first. It was the most readily available weapon. Later, we hardened in the fire and sharpened the point to create a rudimentary spear. As we developed better metallurgy, we developed spear tips, and therefore one of the primary weapons in all ancient historical combat and war has been a spear. It's been the weapon of the masses, of the infantry. But what happens when the weakest point of the weapon, which is where the spear connects to the pole, what happens when you stab something and they move and it snaps off right here? What do you have again? You have the same pole that we have here. So you're back to a pole. So you had a spear, a better weapon, it broke, you downgraded, now you have a pole. If this breaks, what do I have? I have a short stick, right? Not as much leverage, not as much range, but it's still better than these thin fingernails, right? Not great natural weapons. So, in my opinion, there's a lot of weapon evolution involved in the idea of how the staff is used in traditional martial arts. So with that, what I want you to do is start practicing more the sliding motions that we have in the system. So we've done a little bit of this. So likely in class, you've practiced this with me, where you go through a sandwich position or a prayer hands position here, and then you re-grip. And so you switch this way, you switch that way. What you should see, and hopefully you can watch it as we're moving along, I put a zip tie on the tip of my bow today, just so that I can help you guys pay attention to the business end of the bow. Because let's assume for a minute that some of our historical kata might have been for a spear or a nunti. Nunti bow as an example of a spear-like weapon. So a weapon that is basically a bow, but it has additional capabilities attached to one end. So it's a one-ended weapon with reach and some additional thrusting benefits, and this also has some hooking benefits. So it's very much like a Chinese hook spear as well, with those capabilities. So from that perspective, you'll see in Matayoshi Kobudo, people will play certain forms with the Nuntibo rather than, or a Kwandao I've even seen, and some other things, rather than a bow. So really exploring the idea that some of our ancient kata may be more apt for using a spear-like weapon rather than a bow. So the sliding hands are useful because what you'll notice in the prior two methods I demonstrated with the changing of hands, watch, so here's the business end. Here's the business end. If this was my spear and I was going to do something and then I switched hands, all of a sudden my business end is facing that way. Now maybe it was because I had somebody behind me and I wanted to prepare for that, but maybe not. Or if I use the second method, the no hand change method, I've got the business end and the non-business end, and then the business end again. So you see we're not always keeping the business end facing forward, which is where we presume the enemy is typically. So what we can do is utilize that sliding hand change that we practice here. We can start adding that to the rest of our training, which is the intention of the teaching methodology. Okay? So let's give an example. Let's stay stationary like a haikodachi. Let's use a number 2. We throw a standard number 2 with the business end of the stick. Now what I want you to do is perform that sliding hand change to the other shoulder, and then perform the number 2. Sliding hand change, 2, slide, slide, slide. Opposite shoulder, slide. Slide it right to the chamber position. Slide. If the front end is lowish, like towards their bladder, that's fine. Or if you keep it up here, that's fine too. But utilize that sliding hand grip to practice. To start a number 2 is a good way to start, just to get some practice. So after you've practiced that a bit, go back to your numbers 1 through 4 and practice those. So I begin my practice for my kihowaza. So I practice a number 1, and a number 1, and a number 1, and a number 1, and a number 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, number 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. All right, so make sure you practice that as well. So now let's take it up a level. Well, before we do that, let's practice number 5. So number 5, kakyuki ski. So I perform kakyuki ski, and I thrust. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the business end back and float through the other leg to alternate. And then I'm going to flip it back, come through, kakyuki ski, flip it, step back, kakyuki ski, flip it, come back, kakyuki ski. So what you should see is if we were using nuntibo, we would be coming forward, hooking and thrusting, through, hooking and thrusting, through, hooking and thrusting, just sliding so that we're keeping the business end in the right direction. And again, if it wasn't a nuntibo, it would potentially be a spear. So we would be coming through, thrusting, hooking, thrusting, hooking, and thrusting. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. It's not exactly how the spear is typically used, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the business end of the weapon if it weren't purely a bow. All right, so next thing I want to cover is extending your reach. So not using the basic center grip method, right? So as you practice this, typically you're going to begin by staying in the center. You're going to feel when the weight gets out of whack, and you're going to try to make some adjustments to try to keep the center aligned with your own spine. And what I want you to do is start practicing first with your eyes open, then later with your eyes closed. The idea that you're going to go and keep the long end high. So from here, you're going to slide, but keep keep one hand relatively stationary while the other one travels further to set it up originally. And then you're going to try and do a more equal motion. Or you could start it this way instead of here, cheat and start off sides, and then practice your grip change. Okay? Practice that. Now, while you're doing that, work your way back to the middle. Now go long again, if you can do it on the fly. Now work your way back to the middle by adjusting your grip and how far you slide each hand. Learn which hand needs to slide more and how you need to push. See, I'm pushing with this bow, pushing with one hand. The hand that's going up, I'm pushing, and the angle that I push in, the direction of angle that I push in helps guide the bow to slide further in one direction or another. Now, of course, as you practice more, you can do like I'm doing now and not even grip if you can use the friction and the balance of the weight. So then when you feel good with that, practice with your eyes closed so that you know you're still on the long end of the bow. If your hand slips off, you may have a small problem, but it's not that big of a deal. Just train where it's not a danger, okay? Practice going back to the center. Now practice going long on the bottom side. So I've got a long bottom, so maybe I could do a really long hanayuke and nukibo with that, right? But I want to be able to switch. So I'm on this, say I go long to reach that way. Maybe I want to go long this way and then back long again. Okay. So again, I'm trying to stay away from more Chinese methods, but give you some understanding of how Matayoshi Kobudo evolves as you practice more, okay? So practice long on the top side, practice long on the bottom side, practice going back to the middle, and then practice with your eyes closed, okay? A couple other things you can practice just to get some extra work in here. You can practice your Geidan Harai this way. So we can go long Geidan Harai, and then we can change hands and go long in the other side. So I'm going to stay in a hypodachi for this for now, and I'm just using hand change for long Geidan Harai. Right? This is a good practice just to get you out of your own mind, get your body warmed up to the idea that the weapon has an off-sided balance when you hold it long in the long grip like this. And so your body may have to work. You may have to tighten your core more. Use your hara, your koshi, to actually do more of the work as you use this sliding grip to perform the work. So another good example of this would be using sunakake to practice. So we'll go upward kind of figure eights. So if I was using the sunakake footwork, we would do this all in cat stance, right? And you can pause after each one and lock it in, but I recommend you do that as well as kind of using a soft, flowing progression of figure eight uppercuts so that you can feel the weapon better. Okay? Now another one, a combination that I included in Burin-nukun that is also helpful to practice this way. So in Burin-nukun, we perform long kakyuke uppercut and then diagonal. So we're going to switch hands, do long kakyuke uppercut on the other side. Switch hands, long kakyuke, uppercut, diagonal. Kakyuke, uppercut, diagonal. Make sure this crosses your face, uppercuts, and then diagonal. Crosses the body line to protect, uppercut, diagonal. Oh, that one again. All right, so that really covers what I wanted to cover in terms of just reminders that there are other methods beyond the base method that you need to start practicing now that you guys are all a bit further along in your studies. So make sure you practice the foundational method with a lot of hand changes, Make sure you practice a method where you use the side that doesn't have the best range, which means basically don't change hands as you proceed forward and backwards, but then you have to switch sides and do that work all over again so you get work on the other side, all right? And then lastly, continue to expand on your understanding of this sliding hand grip and understand why it may be valuable, because you may be talking about something that has a difference on one end versus the other, and you want to keep that end towards the bad guy, all right? So always keep the pointy end or the shooty end towards the bad guy. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Take care, be safe, all right?